If you're like me, you have a few books in your life that generally changed how you thought, how you felt, and how you acted. One of them for me is The Wealthy Barber. It arrived in my life 36 years ago, and I think of it as sort of this quiet little miracle. There's no charge, there's no jargon, just a simple story set in a barbershop. But a story that helped millions of Canadians, including myself, feel confident with money for the first time. And I wasn't alone. This book has sold millions of copies. I think it's Canada's bestseller of all time, and not because it screamed at people, because it spoke to them. Today, money feels heavier than it did back then. The cost of living has squeezed young adults. Home ownership feels out of reach for many, and this pressure to present a perfect life online makes spending temptations so hard to ignore. So when David Chilton announced he was returning with a fully updated version of his classic, people paid attention. I paid attention. After all, the original helped an entire generation find stability.
I did feel the pressure. I mean, you were writing an update to a book that had that kind of popularity. It's tough. The book had to be better.
And the hope is a new one could do the same at a time when stability feels scarce.
The big thing is you can't overwhelm them. You can't confuse them, but those are important aspects of financial planning now, so they have to get in there. It's not enough just to explain them. How do people prioritize?
David spent 16 months rewriting, rethinking, and retesting every idea in the book. What I love about what he's done is he preserved what still makes sense, and he replaced what no longer does. And through it all, he kept the same mission that drove him in 1989. Take the intimidation out of personal finance. Give people a path to follow that is simple, practical, and doable.
It's the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. By using a little humor and using the story, you're pulling people in. And again, you're taking that intimidation out. And I think that's why it's worked.
So I'm thrilled to have him back on Chatter That Matters. Not just because he wrote a classic, because he has lived a life defined by service, humility, and a genuine desire to help Canadians make better choices. Today, we talk about what has changed, what has not, and how everyday people can reclaim a sense of control in a financial world that often feels stacked against them. Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated. David, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Tony, thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And I must say before we start, I came on to Chatter That Matters, as you know, a few years ago. Of all the podcasts I've done, that's the one I heard the most about, received the most feedback from. So good for you. The podcast has been a big success. I enjoyed that interview immensely, and I'm truly happy to be back again.
You know, David, there's so much we can talk about, but first and foremost is your motivation for doing this. I know you as a personal friend, and this isn't about money. This isn't about fame. This isn't about another award or another record set. You truly want to help everyday Canadians take the in out of insecurity and the un out of uncertainty when it comes to their money.
Yeah, no, I honestly do. And thank you for saying that. And I think that I'm old. You know, at 63, when I started writing 62, this second book, I realized if I don't get at it soon, I may not get at it. But I think, as you mentioned in the intro, there's so many more challenges now. And my kids' friends were asking so many questions. My friends' kids were asking so many questions. I was reading about all of the tough times out there, how much more difficult it is to save. Real estate prices obviously leading the challenge list. And I thought it's the perfect time to bring back that approach. Take the intimidation out, wrap it in a story, use some humor, but recognize that these challenges are very real. There's no magical answers. Here are the best paths you can take. You probably can't do all of these things. So here are the nuances you need to understand so you can prioritize in the proper direction. And so far, the book's gone over very well. And it really was a lot of fun writing it, but challenging. I mean, there was many days I was almost in tears because you're retesting it. You have to start over. Maybe it didn't resonate the way you thought it would, and you're back at the drawing board. Crazily enough, it took me 4 months longer to write the rewrite than it did to write the original.
I have to believe, though, because of the success you had, you never imagined the success you'd have with A Wealthy Barber.
I sure didn't.
The numbers you realized and continue to realize with this book, no one could have predicted. So it must have been a lot of pressure to say, if I'm going to put my name on version 2, I can understand why it took longer to write, because if you've done Abbey Road, you don't want to put something out that's going to pale in comparison.
I did feel the pressure. I mean, you were writing an update to a book that had that kind of popularity. It's tough. And you really have to live up to that. And so I started out, as corny as this sounds, with the goal, the book had to be better, making it even more inviting, covering off more material, making sure the flow was as good, et cetera, et cetera. That meant more and more testing. As you know, I use a very unusual writing approach where I am constantly involving the target demographic, garnering their feedback, doing the rewrites, et cetera. Did even more of that with the update than I did with the original. But you've nailed it. I did feel the pressure. I mean, even when the book launched, you're hitting the early feedback. It's coming back to you. You're a little bit nervous about the whole thing. So I am truly thrilled that it's going over the way it is.
Society's so cynical nowadays. And the obvious thing people would go to is, he's run out of ideas. So he's trying to put a new ribbon around old ideas. But the reality is, it is new. What did you preserve from 1989? What are some of the lessons you offered us back then that are still the lessons in life that we should be following when it comes to our money?
Well, one of the big ones I really tried to hit on in chapter 3 was you can do this, that it's not as complicated as people make it out to be. In fact, interestingly, in the world of finance, it's the simple stuff that works. People have often said to me, well, you're dealing with the masses, so you focus on the simple stuff. And I say, no, I focus on the simple stuff because it's what works. The complicated products, the fancy option strategies, all those types of things, they work better for the person selling them and pitching them than for the person investing in them. In fact, there was a book that came out recently in the States called Fixed by John Campbell, a Harvard professor of economics. And he said the exact same thing. Good financial planning is relatively straightforward. It's the simple things that work. So how can we teach those most effectively? So chapter 3, I really focused on that eternal message of you can do this. It's not that complicated. You don't have to have wonderful math skills. You don't have to be a finance major. Most of this is very understandable. You can learn along with the narrator, learn along with the characters in the barbershop. In fact, the fact that narrator speaks out right away and says, I hate math, I hate finance, I think invites people in to go, good. The narrator hates it, so do I. Let's go along on the journey. So that part of it was definitely maintained. And then a lot of the common big picture themes like pay yourself first, why you have to save something, all of those things, of course, were maintained. The challenge is now, the difference is now, we have more ways to do that. Instead of just RSPs, there's also TFSAs, there's FHSAs. Instead of just mutual funds, there's index funds and, of course, ETFs. You have to explain all those to the reader. The big thing is you can't overwhelm them. You can't confuse them, but those are important aspects of financial planning now. So they have to get in there. And I think the biggest challenge on the writing front, the biggest reason it took so long, it's not enough just to explain them. How do people prioritize? So which route do I take first? I can't save to the desired level. I'm pinched because of home ownership costs. I'm pinched because of the cost of living. I want to set aside something. Where's my best place to start? If I can do that, what's the next step, et cetera? So all of that took a long time to weave in. It really was a blessing that this particular format gives you a lot of characters in the barbershop. And so because of that, you can cover off a wide variety of scenarios. And that really played to my advantage more in book 2 even than it did in book 1.
Many people probably don't know this about you, and you actually shared a clip when you were doing some stand-up comedy. Humor is a big part of your vernacular, and humor and money don't necessarily go together. Your storytelling and your humor, it makes it so accessible. Is this just something that you've always been blessed with? And I know you credit a lot of your relationship with your dad, but is this just something where you go, I've always been inspired by stories, therefore I'm going to use stories as the platform to inspire others?
Yeah, you said that very well. I mean, I've always been drawn into stories with the beginning, the middle, the end, the character, the conflict, and of course, the humor can spice it up. You mentioned my father, very good communicator, used humor, but honestly, my sister probably played an even bigger role. 3 years older, I grew up with her telling stories and taking shots at me constantly and using a lot of humor. She's very funny, and I think I picked up on a lot of it from her. I fell into a very funny friend group, like very funny. And so all of that became a part of my life. But really, again, a lot of this, and you said this when you and I first spoke about the Wealthy Barber years ago, it's the spoonful of sugar to help the medicine go down. You were the one who made that comparison. And I thought that's bang on. By using a little humor and using the story, you're pulling people in. And again, you're taking that intimidation out. And I think that's why it's worked.
You know, one of the things that really roared through your book is when I grew up, they talked about trying to keep up with the Joneses. They got the second car, I need the second car. But today you're talking about this is a constant itch in social media that everybody's trying to put their best life forward. They're the most interesting person. They're the one that has the most cachet, that they're going to garner the most likes. And that's creating such a temptation to spend beyond your means. And you really come at that in terms of, in the short term, that might give you immediate gratification, but it's not setting you up for the long term.
It isn't. And, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I don't normally say things like this, but I'm honestly very proud of chapter 9 of the book, Saving Savvy. I put so much work into that chapter. It tested well almost right out of the gate, kind of 30 years experience watching people make mistakes, what they've done well, what they've done right, weaving it all into the advice of that chapter. But a big part of it was it's tougher now. It's not just people showing off their highlight moments and drawing you in with FOMO and everything else. It's the algorithms. The algorithms are so advanced now and so able to hit us at our weak spots and tempt us with things. And of course, it's so easy to buy now. It's one click away. It's one tap away. It's tougher on this generation, the younger people kind of 45 and under now, than it was when you and I were that age, for sure. Anybody who denies that is out of touch. It's a tough environment to try to shut off all that noise, rise above it, and still do some successful saving. It's not easy.
I talked about keeping up with the Joneses and the second car in the driveway, and I was happy to say that you continue to use owning a car as a consistent financial pitfall.
And it's amazing the percentage of Canadians who, by any common sense measure, spend too much on cars. The car industry has done a remarkable job over the last decades convincing us that we have to define ourselves to some extent by our car. And we've all bought in. What kills me about this is so often I will sit with somebody and help them out and say, you're spending quite a bit too much on cars. And you know what they'll say? Yeah, we are. No, we know that. It's common sense. We are. And Dave, we're going to change that. Then, of course, they never do. And so even though the younger generation has legitimate beef about real estate prices relative to income, cost of goods relative to income, a lot of them make strange voluntary spending decisions on the car front. I would love to see us get that under control.
You talk about housing decisions, and I would say the anxiety, the narrative coming from Ottawa, provincial leaders, municipal leaders, is the affordability of housing. And you talk about housing anxiety, you talk about renting and buying, both carry risks and rewards. What advice can you offer people that forever they thought part of the passage, the Canadian dream, was to put a key in the lock and say, that's my home?
And, people still think that for the most part. So when I was going out doing all the pre-research, talking to people in their 20s and 30s, most still want to own a home, and they want to own a home, not even a townhome and not a condominium. They want to own a home with a yard, et cetera. That's still the Canadian dream in the vast majority of cases. So I have to realistically say to them that may not be possible in all instances. Rent is not throwing your money away. Here's the math and how it looks. Here's some of the combinations and permutations of all of the thinking that gets involved here. And try to make them understand it's still hopeful, but it is tough. And there are some levers you can pull to make it somewhat easier. One of them is managing expectations that fairly or unfairly, the average income can't buy the average price house anymore. And therefore, you're going to have to start out a little bit lower. I emphasize smaller. Not everybody can move to less expensive districts. Maybe you go to 30-year amortization. We came at the home ownership chapter from so many different directions, trying to show people here's the way you can think. But all of that recognized, it's tough. In fact, one of the things Roy says in the book, for example, is if you're single, there may not be a magical answer here unless you have a very outsized income, because it is tough to afford all these. Now, housing prices throughout most of the country, not everywhere, have been trending down a little bit. So that will help on the affordability front, especially with rates right now staying level and maybe even going to dip at some point in the next 6 months to a year.
This wasn't in your book, which means you're going to have to write the third version. But Donald Trump coming out and talking about 50-year amortization, and it's getting quite a bit of blowback because basically it's saying you're just leasing your house and you'll never own it. What are your thoughts in terms of making sure that financial advice comes from people like you and from financial institutions versus necessarily the rhetoric of political leaders who might have more self-serving ambitions at stake?
I'll tell you that specific idea, the problem with it. If you go to 50-year AM, that'll get capitalized back into the price of the house. So because it'll lower your monthly payment, it'll just get shifted over and the housing prices will go up, and that'll take your monthly payment back up more or less to where it was. We've seen that in Canada with some of the initiatives we've attempted. It's very difficult without increased supply of what the consumer actually wants to really have a dampening effect on real estate prices, etc. But your point is a well-taken one. Whom do you trust? And in fact, I think it's interesting. Everybody felt that when I was rewriting The Wealthy Barber, I would probably be hurt by the amount of information out there, TikTok, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's actually played to my advantage, strangely, because it's overwhelming. And people are saying, is there one trusted source, somebody who's been out there for a long time, who's not selling a product, who's going to look at this from a lot of different angles and bring it across in a manner we can understand? So I think all of that noise out there has probably, again, been a big plus in terms of the way people have reacted to the book.
When we return, David and I sift through the world of estates and wills. How does a wealthy barber simplify what seems to be a very convoluted and emotional task? Every family has a moment when you look around and you know it's time. It's time to get organized. It's time to protect what you've built. Time to make sure that people you love are cared for, no matter what tomorrow brings. November is Make a Will Month in Canada, and more than half of us still do not have a will. And when someone dies without one, the law steps in. The law decides how your estate is divided, who manages it. Children involved, the court may even decide who becomes their guardian. Bank accounts will be frozen, property can be delayed, and a family already coping with loss can be pushed into even more stress, confusion, and unnecessary costs. A will matters to everyone, a young couple welcoming their first child, a blended family, aging parents who want to make things easier for their kids. What a will does is it puts your intentions in writing, so your loved ones are not left to guess. At RBC Wealth Management Canada, we help Canadians build legacies that honor what matters most. And when you work with one of our advisors, your estate plan and your financial plan are integrated. And if I can offer you one more piece of advice, consider appointing a professional executor with RBC Royal Trust. It removes pressure from your family and helps ensure your affairs are managed with experience and care. So this November, take the time to create your will. Take the time to meet with an RBC Wealth advisor and put your wishes to paper. Protecting your estate and legacy with a will and professional executor, well, that matters to me, to you, and to RBC.
It was a Thursday afternoon. I drove over. My father was just getting home, high school principal, and I told him the idea. And this guy's brilliant, but he has no business acumen at all. And he said, David, I think that's really quite a dumb idea. And I knew then I had a winner. That was when I thought, okay, I'm on to something. And then I started the whole writing process and, never envisioned it obviously becoming what it did.
Today, my very special guest is David Chilton. 36 years ago, I opened the covers to the book, The Wealthy Barber, and it changed the way I thought about money, and I still think about it today. David, I really appreciated these educational videos that you brought out last year through RBC, talking about estates, wills, etc. What was your motivation for doing that?
They were truly educational in nature. They were all about the importance of having a will, the importance of powers of attorney. How do you choose your executor? What to watch out for on all of those fronts. We were trying to kind of help Canadians to make better estate planning decisions because it is the most ignored area in the personal finance sphere. People are very careless there. In fact, 50-ish% of Canadians don't even have a will. And powers of attorney are often dramatically out of date. And it's amazing now as we have this aging demographic, how often we're seeing this come back and bite people. And how frequently now this is leading to family conflict and financial challenges and everything else. So as you deal with your financial advisor, it's not just about investment planning or even savings planning. Estate planning has to be a bigger and bigger part of it, especially as I mentioned with the aging population.
You also recorded the audio version of the book, and it just makes me smile because I love how your personality comes through it. But what was it like to put David Chilton, who's constantly on the move, almost like a caged animal in the studio, having to read the words it took so long for you to write?
You know me well because I found that hard. Like, I mean, even standing still for that long was tricky, but also keeping your energy up the whole time. But the funny thing is, I did book 2. So I read book 2 and it was a relatively straightforward book. It was like most books. It wasn't a story format. Then I go into the studio to do book 3, The Wealthy Barber Updated, and I realize you're reading all the characters. And therefore, there has to be proper intonation, proper acting, etc. Well, that's a lot trickier. And so there's more redos and everything else. Fortunately, we had fantastic production partners. It took a long time, but really going over well. In fact, I'd say the audiobook is drawing even better reviews than the textbook. So no, that's going over very, very well.
We mentioned it earlier. I've seen what you're like on stage. I have to believe you love the fact that your acting chops were challenged. So as much as you like to consider it a bit of a pain, I have a feeling that you quite enjoy that. You do so much of this pro bono. I mean, you got this great podcast. It seems to have no ads. You know, you've decided to do an exclusive deal with Indigo to start with. Are you at a point in your life and a stage of your life, have you followed enough of the advice of the Wealthy Barber that your calling now is really just to give back so that Canadians can have better peace of mind, sleep a little bit better when it comes to their money?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, thanks for mentioning the podcast. We haven't taken ads in the podcast or done lead gen or anything along those lines. I mean, if A&W ever reached out to me, you know, I would take them as a sponsor. I love A&W, but we don't take any financial companies, et cetera. And I think you are trying to give back. I've been very spoiled. I mean, let's be honest. I fell into this success at a very young age. Everywhere I've gone across the country with all this speaking, I've been treated incredibly well. People literally inviting me into their homes for dinners, et cetera, trusting me when they ask me the questions. So it has been a good opportunity to give back and I've enjoyed it. And then on the distribution front, we did make a rather odd decision. This was even before the tariff war, by the way. I decided to go with a Canadian only project. It was printed in Quebec. You've got Canadian editors, obviously a Canadian writer, and then it's independent bookstores and Indigo only. There's no Costco and Amazon involved on the distribution front. So I think some people look at me and go, that's crazy. They were some of your biggest accounts, but I love the fact that it's an all Canadian project and let's hope it goes well.
David, I always end with my 3 takeaways. And the first one is hearing you today just reminds me of your humility and your generosity. And I mean that as a friend and whose book 36 years ago did change my life. And I started paying myself first. So it's lovely to hear that continue to come through. I think the second thing is your honesty in saying how hard it was to write the second book because you had a bestseller and now you have to improve upon it. I think you have. And I really like the fact that you've preserved a lot from the past. The storytelling comes back into fold, which I really felt was missing in the second book. And the fact that you got to act it out just makes me smile. And the third thing is I see you as somebody in that barbershop. You know, the interesting thing is you write in a way with such authenticity that I could feel like I could be sitting waiting to get my hair cut with all these characters and really feel like those conversations are happening. And that's tough to do when it comes to things as complex as finance. And you, once again, do that with such magic and make it frictionless and effortless for us to take on. So I hope there's people out there that are going to listen or read your book and it'll have the same impact on them as it did on me many years ago, young, just trying to save a few dollars. You made it important. You made it matter.
Well, thank you. And it's a real compliment to hear that you can kind of see the barbershop and see the characters. That's the ultimate dream of a writer. It's ironic, by the way, that I've written a book set in the barbershop. I've had the exact same hairstyle since I was in grade 1. I'm on year 59 of this hairstyle. I did grow it longer in high school, but I've never changed it. So yeah, I'm not exactly a hair specialist, that's for sure.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.